We're also recording this. Joe's recording all of this too. So it will hopefully edited in an edited form be available on the web. So in case you need a little bit of review. Also too, notice that you all have this manual, which is for you to take home to keep. If you'd like, you can leave it here over the next couple of days because we'll be here tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday till noon. So you can leave anything here until then. But we hope that you'll take this with you, take notes in it. It's your manual. And it's really meant to be a good general basic information source for landscape maintenance. It's geared toward roadside maintenance, but there's a lot in here. For example, if you have your own private companies and so forth, you do weekend work and so forth, there's a lot of good information here on that as well, just good basic information. We'll be referring to the manual as we go through. We won't necessarily cover this in consecutive chapters. We'll skip around a little bit, but we'll tell you what chapter we're on. So please kind of thumb to that chapter. And the whole purpose of this first workshop here that we're in the next 2.5 days is just to get you familiar with this manual. There are a few differences now that we might be making in how you do things. More suggestions really than anything else. This particular manual has everything in there. We're not, of course, this is about a 500-page manual. We're not going to cover everything. We're going to cover the highlights. So you can see what else is in the manual. Okay, just want to start out just in a few minutes here, giving you just a sort of an overview of what we'll be doing. The manual, of course, should be read and used by practically everybody, but it's geared toward you as HDOT contractors and state employees, but also maintenance managers, the crew. Are most of you crew or supervisors, or how many supervisors do we have for DOT? One? Only one? That's good. Okay. So landscape architects as well too. Hopefully they'll be reading some of this because really there's a lot of good information on planning as well, which is going to reduce maintenance in the long run. Contractors, inspectors, planners. This is meant for all these people. The purpose of the manual in the workshop here, you can look at, and here again, this is all in the manual. This is chapter 4, but 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's all about being a good land steward. Being a good land steward, we'll go through here real quick. It's meaning taking care of the land, making sure that we leave it at least in as good a shape as we receive it. Hopefully in a better shape for our next generations. And trying anyway to be sustainable, meaning practices that will help to carry on without too much waste and so forth from generation to generation. And there's various guidelines in here. We'll talk about the landscape maintenance zone, the LMZ, a little bit. What you're familiar with, the landscape maintenance zone is simply the area that you work in along the roadside. It could be just a few feet underneath the guardrail, or it could be from the roadside out maybe 50 or 60 feet. And we'll talk a little bit about what determines that. So this is the purpose of the manual and this particular workshop, to just familiarize you with some of these things. Of course, we are DOT, and the contractors who work for DOT is the largest land steward in the state. You guys are the ones responsible on the front line for taking care of thousands and thousands of miles of roadside, and that's a lot of area. Being a good steward again, leaving things in hopefully a better place than what we found them. Reducing waste, conserving resources. Some of the things that we'll be talking about here, again, as suggestions. Hopefully this will eventually lead to some ways of doing things a little bit differently. But aiming for zero waste as much as we can, making sure that we use everything that we possibly can, not throwing away and wasting various things. So, like for example, pesticides. I know that Oahu doesn't use a lot of pesticides yet. Fertilizers, very little fertilizer being used too. But hopefully this will change over time, and we'll be talking about both pesticide application and also a little bit about fertilizer. Irrigation systems. They're for those of you that do have an irrigation system on your contract. We'll spend all of Thursday, half a day Thursday, just on irrigation maintenance and repair. And that's probably the largest chapter in your book. I think it's chapter 14. And some of these other things, protect the biodiversity, using native plants when possible and when practical. Native plants don't fit everywhere. Native plants, Hawaiian native plants, a lot of them are more suited to the rainforest, not the roadside, or the beach, and not the roadside. So we just can't automatically put any native along the roadside and expect it to survive. But there are some that can be used. Maintaining and enhancing the stability in nature. Again, you guys are the ones out there on the front line. This is what the tourists see. The tourists, ride the roadways, and this is basically what they see. And you guys take care of that. Some of the beautiful views that might be available along the roadside oftentimes are blocked by hollycoe and things, that can grow up. And here again, that's part of your job, is to try and clear out some of those areas, scenic views and so forth, as much as possible, so that they can get better views of mountains and ocean and so forth. Here again, we're just asking small changes. All can go together over a long period of time to really make a big contribution and a big change. And we're kind of asking you to, is what I'm doing now practical? Does that make sense? Is there a better way to do it? And have an open mind, about small changes. Just because we've done these things for the last 20 years or maybe during your whole career. One of the unfortunate things about landscape training is there is no landscape training oftentimes. You learn it from somebody else who learned it from somebody else, and that may not be the best or the most efficient way to do things. It's the way you do it, and it seems to work, but there may be better and more efficient ways other than those. So consider all the options, and we're going to be, in the 2.5 days here, we're going to be suggesting some of these options that we might make small changes with. Shaheen, I'm sorry. We need to make all that white sometime. Yeah. Okay. Oh, can I click down? Okay. Here again, the purpose of the manual, we've already been through this anyway. So this is what we've talked about before. So no sense in going through it again. Okay. Okay. Here's one slight difference that DOT has made. They've divided up all the roadside into one of 4 different areas. And those areas are going to determine the level of maintenance that's going to be required. The urban area, roadside setting, suburban, rural, and conservation. Those 4 different areas. Depending upon the area that your particular contract is in, would determine the level of maintenance. For example, urban areas, especially coming in from the airport, for example, high visibility areas. We'd like to see a little bit more higher level of maintenance, and we'll talk about some of that. Possibly fertilizing in some of these areas. Possibly using different kinds of mowers and edgers and things like that along the curbs. Making things a little bit better, competing sort of with the commercial landscapes in high visibility areas, so that there's not this oftentimes big contrast between coming in from the airport and seeing a marked difference between the way it's maintained between roadside and commercial. So these 4 things, by the way, in your manual, this is in here. This particular It's on page 15 in your manual. You might thumb over there to page 15 in your manual. And this is just a summary of the kinds of things we're talking about, differences in each of these 4 landscape maintenance zones: urban, suburban, rural, and conservation. Again, urban, the highest cost and highest maintenance. Some of the things, especially at intersections, main focuses of downtown coming in, Nimitz Highway, for example, coming down to the bottom of the Poly, coming into town, just those areas there. Most of these areas would not be considered urban. And this is one of the things that DOT would have to decide on, where does urban and where does suburban start, So these areas, again, even suburban, fairly high cost, but less maintenance than the others. Rural, actually, in some of these rural areas, there may be some changes where there's not as much being done as there is now. Mowing less often. They're trying to look for no-mow ground covers, for example, no-mow situations where you're not having to mow all the time in rural type areas. Conservation, though, is a different story. That's higher maintenance, because there you're trying to protect the rainforest and so forth, and you're involved in getting rid of invasive species, identifying the invasive species, and that kinds of things. So it's quite a bit different than the rural areas. But here again, these are the standards that have been set up for those 4 areas. This is mainly for managers here trying to decide a mode of action for your work. It's a cycle, starting out up here at the beginning of the project, evaluating what's already been done. If you decide that what you're doing is good, yes, it's fine, then go ahead and keep doing what you're doing, but continue to evaluate and document and report. This is all part of your everyday activities anyway. At least the managers are responsible for reporting work progress and so forth. Actually, contractors have a much greater responsibility for reporting because their pay depends upon that. They have to invoice and they have to send their report along with that. State DOT people, your pay doesn't depend upon that, but also it's important for the managers to submit their reports on a weekly or monthly basis just to see what's going on. If you decide that that there's no current practices or what you're doing doesn't work, then reevaluate and determine what will work and adapt and make some changes and apply those, and then do that, and then again reevaluate again. So the whole idea is a continual reevaluation from time to time and a rethinking of how things are done, not just doing things as usual. So we're asking for a little bit more open-mindedness here in just a few of the things that are being done to continually trying to improve things. We'll talk about chapter 14 toward the end of the book, reporting, inspecting, some of the specifications for those areas there. Well, okay, here again, having a sustainable landscape contributes to all these things here. Again, it's in your manual. The main thing, again, is being a good land steward, taking care of what we have, making sure it doesn't get any worse, at least, than how we find it. And some of the objectives here, of course, complying with all legal policies and mandates, OSHA, safety, mostly safety things. We want to make very sure that all safety OSHA mandates are covered, and now they are. There's no problem with that, but we want to make sure that this continues. Improving HDOT's image is important too. I'm a retired state worker too. I know some of the jokes, that people have about state workers, and I know too it's not true. But part of our job here is to improve that image, to make sure that people know the contributions that HDOT state union workers make. And also the private, actually contractors oftentimes have a higher visibility area to take care of than HDOT does. Being environmentally responsible, being a good community member, all this kind of thing. And actually here, I would move this up a little bit. Contributing to the aesthetic appeal, meaning to the beauty of Hawaii. I think that's one of the top things that the end result of your guys' work will do, is to improve the beauty and the availability to tourists and ourselves of that beauty of the islands. Okay, one of the areas that we'll be talking, one of the things we'll be talking about, this is on page 22 again in your manual. You might thumb over there. It's a little graphic. The landscape maintenance zone, it's called the LMZ, which I'm sure you're familiar with. You may not be familiar with that particular term. But the landscape maintenance zone is simply the area that you're working in. It's from the side of the road out to a certain point. And how far that extends would depend upon the terrain. If there's mountains and so forth, you can only extend it so far. If there's ocean and cliffs, you can only extend it so far. But other things that are considered are speed limits as well. But the LMZ, this area here, being shown in this just general area here, this is the area that we want to try to keep clean. This is the area that we mow every 2 weeks. We don't want large trees growing up into that area. There may be some there now that we don't necessarily want to cut down, but we want to keep this landscape maintenance zone on either side of the road here. This will also, on this side of the road, will be considered the landscape maintenance zone. And you see here depicted there are some existing things here, which would be a safety hazard. And depending upon the speed limit, some of those things may or may not be taken out. But the main thing is that we don't want new saplings coming in, albizia, and some of these things that grow very quickly and become a hazard. The landscape maintenance zone, again, is an important thing to consider. Also, again, in that same general area of your manual, this graphic here, depending upon traffic, the distance of the landscape maintenance zone at 20 miles an hour would be closer in at 30, 35. As you get a higher and higher speed limit, the landscape maintenance zone extends further out if there's room to do that. And oftentimes it'll extend out all the way to the easement, which may be even more than that too. Now, one of the things that might happen here is that in some of the areas where you're mowing all the way out to the easement, where it's really not all that necessary, that part may be cut back a little bit, so that you're at least adhering to the speed limit distance and not necessarily taking it all the way out to the easement, especially in rural areas like that. But the main thing, again, too, is that once you stop mowing, you're going to get a lot of weeds coming in, you're going to get saplings coming in. So in the long run, it may be easier just to continue to mow. But this is one of the things that DOT is sort of thinking about. So anyway, the LMZ speed limit is one thing to consider. Okay, what to do in the LMZ? The main thing, ensure vegetation doesn't, any kind of vegetation, doesn't become a safety risk. Don't allow new things coming in to grow and get big and cars run into. A regular mowing maintenance schedule is enough to take care of that. If you're mowing every 2 to 3 weeks, then you're mowing down all those saplings and so forth. You don't have to worry about it after that. Also, visibility is a big factor in the landscape maintenance zone, especially around intersections. Making sure that overhanging limbs and so forth don't block signs, which, again, you're already doing all this. This is just still, a normal procedure. Sight distances for passing and stopping and so forth. Again, the greater the speed limit, then the further ahead people should be able to see for safety, and therefore that area, it's kind of like a triangle. As you get to an intersection, it opens up and it has to be further away from the intersection just to maintain that line of sight. Maintaining lateral, meaning sideways, and vertical up and down clearance for trees. We'll talk a lot about that when we talk about pruning. And again, the difference there in rural and suburban is different, and urban too. There's different setbacks for trees in urban areas, only like 2 feet along sidewalks and so forth. In rural areas, it can be much more than that, 30 feet or more. Height distances above, clearances above, at least 15 feet above the road or more, both in urban and in rural areas. So those of you involved with pruning, one of your major jobs there is to make sure that you're clearing and keeping that distance open. Okay, and here we're just talking about that. Page 25 and 26 talks a little. Now, here we'll talk a lot more about this when we talk about pruning tomorrow. At least 18 inches from the curb in the city areas. Oftentimes you can see this tree kind of leaning out there. That can be a problem. Punahou, if you're familiar with Punahou, that's one of probably the best examples where these huge monkey pod trees are about this close to the curb, but the limbs come way out over the area, and as limbs grow, they get fatter and fatter, right? So they get lower and lower, and oftentimes they come down low enough as they get old enough where they're under the limit, but it's a huge limb now, so it becomes really a big problem. Height over highways, 17 feet at least. Over sidewalks and so forth, 7 feet. And here again, these are all standard heights that HDOT has determined. And this is what those of you that are involved with pruning and so forth need to make sure is maintained. Here again, a little bit more about the landscape maintenance zone and the distances. Here's a chart. This is on page 30 and 31. This particular chart here is a handy thing to have. If there's space available on the side of the road for the landscape maintenance zone, these are the distances required at intersections. Now, this is intersection distances, not regular roadside. So you can see that at the intersection here, things begin to open up so that this area here is kept clearer than this area back here as you approach the intersection, and again, depending upon the speed limit. Even now, especially at unmarked intersections, where you have, say a stop sign here and a stop sign here, and this is through traffic. If it's a four-way stop or a stoplight, it's a little bit safer there because there is traffic control. But especially where you've got through traffic coming, you want to really make sure that people are aware and are able to see far enough ahead. Keeping things like this, young albizia and so forth, from growing up. And you guys are all aware that some of these trees can grow really, really quick. Unspecified, unless the engineer says not to cut something down in the landscape maintenance zone that's already there, then large trees, large hazard trees should be removed. And by all means, don't let little things like this get big along the roadside or anywhere within the landscape maintenance zone. And again, regular mowing and so forth would be enough to prevent that from happening. But even at this point here, these are young albizias. Those are too big to mow already, right? They're only a couple of years old. So here you're going to have to come in and chop them down, dig them out or whatever, to make sure that they don't get any bigger. Here again, we have this too many times. The purpose of the manual in the workshop, again, basically being a good land steward, working efficiently, making sure that we manage invasive species. We'll have a speaker tomorrow that'll come in and talk about invasive species and some of the things that a DOT can do just to identify those particular potential noxious weeds coming into the roadside. That's the most common way that invasive plants come into an area is along the road on cars. seeds and so forth are spread by cars. And you're right there, and the first place that those weeds are going to go is into the roadside, and from there into the rainforest. So here again, the purpose of the manual workshop is here. The way this is going to work here is each presentation will have, which is in the manual, will have a little, some of them will have a little hands-on demonstration, whether it's here in class or outside. Many of them are outside, just to demonstrate some of the things we've talked about. And there'll be, it's not really a quiz, it's a series of questions that we go over with you in class to help you review. It's for you to keep. Hopefully you'll keep it in your manual just for, as a means for review later on. But at the end of each, we'll have a little, what we call a quiz, 10 to 15 questions, true and false, just to help you review a little bit later. On the last day, we'll have about a 10-question evaluation for you to evaluate the workshop and making any suggestions to improve it that you might.